All right, everyone. Welcome once again to the Face of Business. I'm your host, Damon Pistolka, and I am so happy and excited for our guest today because we've got Doug Gray coming to us from Action Learning Associates, and he's in the North Carolina today in the lovely mountains. Doug, thanks for being here today.
My pleasure. I appreciate your excitement.
Oh, yeah. We're going to have fun.
Absolute. I loved our
Yeah.
conversation because we both have roots in South Dakota. And here we are.
Yeah, and here we are.
Taking the place of
Yes,
whatever
yes, yes.
people are working on, huh?
Yeah. So, Doug, we always like to start out with how did you and Action Learning Associates get into what you're doing today? You've been doing it for a little while.
Yeah, 1997. At the time, a number of people turned to me and said, Doug, you're an executive coach. And I said, really? What's an executive coach? I'd sort of say that's a question I've still been pursuing and trying to answer. So the short answer is I've evolved in the last, whatever it is, 30 years with different kinds of clients, in part because of business needs, right? So it used to be small business owners, and then it was larger business owners, and then it was complex family systems. And then it was family businesses and family enterprises, which are when there are multiple branches maybe that have different
Mm-hmm.
assets. And that's where I'm focused right now is those family businesses and family enterprises. It's fun. It's messy, and
Yeah.
it's a massive part of our GDP. Perhaps you know that. Quiz
How
question:
much? How
20,
much of it
40,
is?
60, or 80%. What do you think, David? Any thoughts?
What was the? What were my options?
20, 40, 60, 80, or 100% of our GDP in the US?
I would be going in the 40% range.
You're a little low, my friend. It's at
Ah,
least 60%. Depends on
ah,
who you ask. So the wealth advisors who have a vested interest in having a higher number will tell you it's 65 or higher percent. So same question. What percent of our job growth in the US is tied to family-owned businesses? 20, 40, 60, 80.
oh, it's more. It's more than 60 on that. I'm sure.
Now you're trending up. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And if we were in another part of the country, it would be, or world, it would be even higher. But the bottom line is family businesses define most enterprises, most GDPs in every corner of the world. Think of Asia.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever country you're picturing right now in Asia, there's some family history and there's some tea house down the road that literally has 10 or 15 generations, right, of
Yes.
owners. Well, those are all family owned. It's that eldest son gets the farm. No, the eldest son gets the tea house in that example. In
Mm-hmm.
Italy, it'd be the winery. Here, it might be the manufacturing shop, or it might be the financial services shop, or it could be a franchise.
Mm-hmm.
Think about a lot of those owners. But that pattern has worked great. You could argue if you're a white male, or if you're the male in the dominant culture in that country.
Mm-hmm.
It's not so good if you're a female,
Mm-hmm.
and not so good if in most cultures if you don't know what your role might be. Let's imagine you've got 6 kids or 8 kids or 10 kids. Then it becomes a question: how do you look at succession over time? And let's imagine that generation one, the founder, does really well and generates $100 million annual revenue business, whatever that means. Has a bunch of employees, whatever that means. Maybe it's 100, maybe it's 1,000, maybe it's 10,000 employees. Then what happens over G2? The kids look at dad or mom and they say, ah, the founders were so pivotal in the growth of this business. And it doesn't matter what the business is, and it doesn't matter what corner of the country or world we're talking about. The Gen 2 will look at Gen 1 and say, thank you. What happens when it's Gen 3 or 4 or 5? Now you've got an exponentially larger group of people, right?
Yes.
It's called the cousin consortium, and it's also called chaos quite
Yes.
often, right? Because they don't know what to do. And they look around and they say, wow, there's this shared asset, family capital. There could be money, but it may not be accessible because it could be tied up in trusts. So the next gens might be in their 20s or 40s or 50s, right? And they're holding their breath sometimes.
Yes.
So that's why I'm interested in this population so much. It's pivotally important. It's a massive part of our GDP and our economy. It supports a lot of jobs. And you may also know, I'll give you one more trivia question.
All right.
True or false? You know it's going to be true. True or false? We are in the largest wealth transfer in human history, at least $75 trillion.
That is definitely true.
You probably have some stories and other people on your system here that can provide
Yes.
testimonies about that
Yes.
wealth transfer. So you might think that it's all like the nasty stuff you see on HBO Succession movies, right?
My wife thinks that. I think it's really not that way.
No, it's not. However, those are the stories that are frequently told.
Yes.
And they have throughout history. The Godfather,
Yes.
Dallas. Do you remember Dallas? You and I are up
Yep.
in age.
Yeah.
Well, why is it that that story gets told? King Lear doesn't know how to pass on his assets to his children. When the reality is, X percent, let's say it's over 90% of wealth transfers happen quietly and easily.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time, succession happens quietly. Well, it may or may not be easy. Too much of our, let's go back to the farming agricultural roots in our country. Are most of the people in this call US based or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Most of the listeners are in the U.S.
Okay. So everybody knows a story of some farmer who was really instrumental when they were kids and maybe didn't have any children who wanted to take on the farm. They had the land, maybe they had the machines, they didn't have the cash, and they didn't have the passion. So
Mm-hmm.
what happens? In my family, all the kids go to the city. They get college educated. They realize they don't need to go. They didn't have one choice anymore. And instead of having whatever percentage of our economy was farm based, it's now
Mm-hmm.
what, 3 to 5% or something? It's really
Yeah.
small.
Yeah.
Massive change. Well, from my seat, what that tends to mean is that farmers don't know how to pass on the assets to their kids. And you've probably seen this a lot. So aggregators will come in and they're venture capital backed, they're private equity backed. And I hope I'm not upsetting any of your listeners. But the fact is, they don't care so much about family capital. They don't care about the local church or the park or the community or the
Nope.
hospital.
Nope.
So, one reason I'm passionate about this conversation is that every country is built on that social capital, it's called. And to the extent that we don't own it privately anymore as much, we are breaking up the fabric of America, the fabric of every country. It needs to be privately owned and it needs to be locally owned to as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a little bit of a political rant or angle or whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
When I think
Well,
about
it is. There's a massive change, and this is both when you look at business legacy, you look at land or farming legacy. It's all changing a lot because in your local HVAC company down the street that's been in there for 3 generations is now being bought by the private equity group that doesn't change the name, but they're owned by somebody else that's
yep,
different motives. They don't sponsor the little league team every year. They don't keep their employees when there's a little bit of trouble in the economy like the local owner would. And then you look at the farmland in the United States, the biggest holders of farmland in the United States, some of the richest people that and some of the countries that are outside of the US own land in the United States.
that's true. And farming is such a dramatic example. You and I can
Yeah,
relate to it
yeah.
because we have those shared geographic roots from our childhood. But what about manufacturing? It used to be that manufacturing made in America, made in the USA,
Mm-hmm.
was the brand, right?
Yes.
And not only because it was good quality, but it was also a way to perpetuate those family businesses in local communities Manufacturing's still a huge percentage of the family-owned businesses. Don't get me
Yeah.
wrong. And it's under threat because
Mhm.
they're being acquired in the same pattern.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are acquired and combined and all this other stuff.
Yep. Yeah. So the question often becomes, what does a business psychologist do?
Yeah. Yes.
You talk to hundreds of people a week, and so do I. Well, when we see the same pattern happening again and again, I tend to ask, how can I help these people? To be clear, I was in the Methodist church in that small town throughout Minnesota and South Dakota, rural New York, because my dad was a Methodist minister. So I was the kid in the front row with my brother and sister, and we were all being watched, right?
Yes.
Social capital is not an abstraction for me. And when I think about all the wealth that contributes to churches and the arts and charity, it has to come from a sound financial network. Has to. Financial capital and family capital are intertwined, just like my fingers.
Mm-hmm.
So when I looked around, I asked, well, what is it that the next gens need to know? In other words, how do they need to behave?
Yes.
And the short answer was nobody had a short answer. So there are theories, there were psychologists who had explored other kinds of businesses, but it's different when you work in a publicly traded company. And it's different if dad's the boss or grandpa's the boss or your uncle is the boss, right? I keep using masculine pronouns because that's common, more common than not.
Yes.
So, anyways, I reached out and did a 360 research project, which essentially identifies 50 behaviors, 50 things that people could do if they wanted to succeed in their career. And globally validated it, didn't make up a thing. And it's all based on the feedback that we got in that research. The model is basically, how does the individual fit in the world? How does the individual fit in a family? I've got kids. I think you've got kids.
Mm-hmm.
It's the ancient pattern, right? That's also the basic roots of what's called industrial organizational psychology, IO, is individual organizational. So you can't see this well, but the gist is that's the model. Here's the individual, and here are the three roles that are commonly talked about: ownership, family, and business roles. Kind of like three rooms in a house.
Mm-hmm.
You go in the front porch, you go in this room, and you talk in the kitchen with the family. You go in the, say, dining room and talk with the owners. And then you go out in the porch with the business leaders and you get it done. Those are the three rooms.
Yeah.
The fourth room that we adopted in this model is down here, and that's the learning system. Psychologists know that people either are open to learning or closed to learning. If you're open to learning, it's called a growth mindset, and there's a bunch of research
Mm-hmm.
related to that. It's why people might be listening to this conversation. They have a growth mindset, they want to learn, they've got questions. The other kind of folks are fixed. I have a fixed mindset. Damon, I've got a fixed mindset about a lot of things because I don't understand them. Like I don't understand opera. I don't understand martial arts. I don't understand a lot of political stuff. And I probably won't. I just don't have the intellectual capacity to understand it.
Yes.
But there's other stuff I do care about. And that's how do we help business leaders learn the skills that they need. And so essentially we created this process and asked 7 different groups to rate Doug, let's say, on Doug's behavior in that family business. Well, people never get this feedback in their career.
Yes.
They don't get it in publicly traded companies. So it's eminently valuable. In fact, it's rare because it's an anonymous process and it's confidential for that person. So the 7 rater groups are a bunch of board members, a bunch of owners, a bunch of managers, a bunch of peers, a bunch of direct reports, a bunch of family and friends, because they're the ones that keep us going. And all those 6 are contrasted with what Doug thinks about Doug's performance.
Mm-hmm.
Let's imagine 20 people participate in this process. And they do it this way, and they do it this way, and we talk, and I collate the data. And I ask them 3 questions. What should this leader start doing and stop doing and continue doing? And I take notes in a really fancy system like this,
Yep.
combine it with their digital notes, and then I edit and provide for them that feedback because they never get it in their careers. So that's the 360 process. Now, I don't know if you're a behavioral psychologist or experienced in this, but does that explanation make sense?
The explanation makes sense because, leaders in general don't get that kind of feedback. And
Ever.
in a family business, there's even different dynamics where they would not make it even less common that they would get it.
It's a pattern, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're motivated by fears, that oldest part of our brain. So if Uncle Bob, for instance, said something nasty about your daughter, we've got daughters, about my daughter
Yeah.
20 years ago, I'm going to remember what Uncle Bob said. I heard a story in my last call about somebody who said, I didn't go into education because Uncle so and so told me not to, and he had been a teacher for a bunch of years. He discouraged me, and then we haven't talked for decades. And I thought, ay, 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 because I know all these people. And I thought, what a discouragement for this person who's a wonderful educator. She's
Hmm.
gifted in that way, and that could be her calling. Well, if we always listen to the Uncle Bobs, the negative voices,
Yes.
we're going to be fear-based. Well, let's migrate a little bit. Let's talk about wealth advisors who used to say, your job is to protect the assets. Don't pay as many taxes as you think you ought to, whatever that might mean.
Hmm.
And here's the trust, and here's the loophole, and here's the process so that you don't have to fulfill your obligation, which led to a lot of fear-based decisions about how do I protect the assets from the government or from giving, from philanthropy. Now we've migrated. We kind of had to. This thing called a certified financial professional, CFP, emerged in part because so many wealth advisors misbehaved.
Hmm.
They didn't act in my best interests or your best interests, right?
Hmm.
That's called moving in a different direction. In my world, it's called positive psychology. How do we flourish? In other words, how do we take the assets and generate multi-generational value over time? And another example would be this giving pledge that you probably heard about. Warren Buffett and others have pledged to give 50 or more percent of their assets away. That's a good notion. They haven't done it yet. So in our lifetimes, let's hope in the next decade or two, we're going to see more and more of this actually
Yes.
happening. So that when, I forgot her name, Bezos's wife, what's her
Oh,
name?
yes. I forget her name, but she pledged a bunch too.
Yep. And she pledged it often to women organized and owned nonprofits, right? Who really aren't capable of handling another million or $10 million because they don't have the infrastructure to support it. Hospitals do, universities do, and they'll take the philanthropy. But we need to be careful that we're distributing these assets in a careful, intelligent way. So that led to peer groups. And basically, last December, I don't know, Q3, Q4 of 2023, a client said, Doug, would you please create a peer group for my son and a non-family business leader in our company? And I said, of course. So we sold and marketed and delivered 2 peer groups and a whole process. All of
Hmm.
this is described at nextgenpeergroups with an S.com. People can go there and see how it works. But here's the deal. People who are those next gens are often really impatient. They want to respect the elders, but they're tired of waiting.
Hmm.
They're often college educated. They've got choice. They look around in social media and digital media and they see other examples of other people who have accelerated their careers doing something outside the family business, right? So those folks are lonely and they don't know who else to talk to, filled
Ah.
with anxiety. That's what the peer groups serve. And we created a number that are open enrollment. People can find them and click on and apply, and then I'll interview them and make sure they're a good match and all that. And then we'll move
Yep.
forward. The other reality is groups who need like an association of construction guys
Hmm.
or roofers need to retain their members. It's a massive problem. I used to run a
Hmm.
nonprofit in DC. I've worked with ARP and the Red Cross when those folks are, and they're super well funded, right? But
Hmm.
when they look at their employees, they struggle often. How do we develop and retain the best?
Mm-hmm.
That's what peer groups can do. So we created another model that supports the associations, that helps them develop and retain people who not only learn the skills they need to be better business people and develop the social collateral that they need. It's called social capital, but also they show up at conferences. So now we've got a end metric, right? We can see
Yeah.
who shows up at the fall conference and the spring conference, and we'll have a pre-event day to accelerate their learning. So I think
Yeah.
the thread here is 360 assessments accelerate individual learning often. Peer groups accelerate individual learning or association or team learning within a certain profession. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes, it does. It does, because like you said, we need to get that feedback, and then we need to learn to be able to continue developing so we can become better leaders and really the next generation. So when you're in these family businesses, what are some of the things that if someone's listening today that you run into often that they might go, that's me?
Yeah. Well, there are a number of things that come to mind. There are archetypes or patterns that I see again and again and again.
Mm-hmm.
One is I never knew my parents were so difficult, and I come to realize that everybody's parents are difficult. I don't mean to sound like a therapist, but there's a degree of this anonymity. We don't talk about various kinds of abuse. The other day, I had a video recording with a G7 150-year-old company and a woman who said that to me. There are different forms of abuse. Could be physical, could be verbal, could be professional.
Mm-hmm.
And we see this playing out. It's called generational abuse. So if, for instance, there's a history of criminality or suicide or violence or drug or alcohol addiction, you name it, down the line, that's a pattern that often recurs, just like cancer and diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
We see these as transgenerational patterns. So I plot them with folks. I use software. One of the best is called Geno Pro, Geno, and help people look for those patterns so that they can see the bad stuff. And then I go to another website and have them look at the good stuff. And I'll endorse this, viacharacter.org, via character. And via is thought to be the values in action, but it's also the road back in Latin. And the Meyerson family gave away this assessment. And they gave away all the results to a group of folks at Wharton, at the University of Pennsylvania in Wharton. And Marty Seligman and others looked at this data, and they basically said, how do we help people grow and learn and such? How do we take the good stuff throughout the family? So if grandma was charitable and mom was charitable, how did the next gens become charitable? And how are we so intentional about our charitable giving that the building over there at that college that used to have the name on the top doesn't really need the name on the top, because we're going to donate anonymously forever. Now we're talking like social fabric.
Yeah.
That's really super powerful. So one answer to your question is abusive patterns get transmitted over time. So do charitable patterns. And those are called signature strengths. They're good things. It's the thing that makes the Pistolka family distinctive,
Mm-hmm.
or the Gray family distinctive. And we don't often celebrate those things. I think it's because we don't know how.
Mm-hmm.
We don't
I
have the
agree.
vocabulary.
We're too busy being good or bad at what we are.
Yeah, there's a polarity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good,
Because we
bad.
all have some of each.
I think you're right. Recently, I wrote something on tribalism, which is in my opinion, the number one most important wonder of the world. We've got these pyramids, we've got the Great Wall, we've also got tribalism, which means I'm going to take care of my loved ones come hell or high water.
Mm-hmm.
And I always will. So when I think about how our tribal interests enable us to take care of our neighbors and take care of those who maybe live nearby but aren't as neighborly as we wish for whatever reasons. Uh, that's what informs a lot of our decisions and a lot of our uh, behaviors. That
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we're not so smart. We don't really think with this part of our brain. We react with that part of our brain. So, anyways, tribalism is another pattern that I see again and again.
So what if someone was tribalism, how would that show up in the business?
In 100 ways, and sometimes they're not verbal and they're not stated. Some theorists basically say that culture at a business needs to have artifacts like a cup or a glass that has the name of the business on it. You walk in the lobby, there's the values, there's the vision, right? Those are artifacts. The other thing you need are shared beliefs. It's good and noble to work for or with Doug Gray. That's a shared belief. And the third thing are unstated assumptions. The unstated assumption is I'm going to work with Doug or his team so that I can accelerate the best things in our business. Boom. It's out there. We just haven't named it.
Mm-hmm.
So we need a process to assess it, recommend it, celebrate it, perpetuate it over time. So artifacts, unstated belief, shared assumptions, that's commonly how we define culture.
Yeah. Very good.
I go in and I ask a bunch of questions and I take a bunch of notes. And sometimes I use artificial intelligence to collate it. And then I'll give it to us as a summary.
Mm-hmm.
So they can create a constitution.
Oh, that's interesting. So they're creating a constitution. What does in a family business, what does this constitution outline? What are some of the common things that they talk about in it?
The things that they commonly don't talk about. In other words,
good.
That's why I'm there, right? To facilitate that process.
Yes.
So often it will start with the values that they share. And many families share the same ones.
Mm-hmm.
Integrity, honesty, service to others, charitable giving. Those are fairly common. But there also might be a statement of vision. Here's where we want to go. There might be a statement of mission. Here are the businesses we're going to support, and only these, because that's the golden egg. We want to support, say, healthcare or franchises or real estate.
Mm-hmm.
They might do that because the founders did so or the elders did so, and they want to perpetuate those. But the value of a charter, and it could be 1 page or 3 pages, it's not really that lengthy. It's the process of writing it that becomes really helpful. So then the next phase or part of it typically has some guidelines or ground rules, good things to do. The hardest part for many families is how do you make decisions? And we don't often have structures. My opinion, my experience is that all we need is a little structure sometimes. A little structure goes a long way. So let me give you an example. When our kids were in middle school and high school, we'd have Sunday evening family meetings. They hated it, they said. And they weren't long. They were like 10 or 15 minutes sometimes. So we looked at the calendar, but we also looked at financial stuff. And we looked at important stuff that was going on. And it started out being mom and dad led. And we've got 2 daughters. And then it became they led. Well, that's the structure. That's the only structure they needed. Now I facilitate those family meetings for messy family systems.
Yeah.
And it's often like this. It's virtual. For instance, there could be 3 or 4 elders. This is last Tuesday night, I guess. And then 4 next gens, biological and in-laws, married spouses and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And we had 3 wealth advisors who were doing their best, with some slides and such, to explain to the kids more about Roths and IRAs and compounding assets and investing over time. Why? Because financial literacy is critically important, and mom and dad can't do a great job.
Yeah.
So my role is to encourage the kids who were in their 30s and 40s to speak up and ask questions. We don't do enough of that. We don't provide the structure or the process to encourage people to ask questions.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes. Yes, it does. because you're helping them start up those shared values and then execute that vision and mission by educating and getting people on the same page, and then they can move forward better.
Yep. And the wealth
Yeah.
advisors love it because my message is you need to have a one-on-one with so-and-so before our next meeting, which is 2 months from now.
Mm-hmm.
So if I own the process or manage the process, the family will trust that and then be able to ask the questions as they need them and get the answers when they need them. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
So
family constitution.
go ahead. Sorry.
That's the power of a family constitution. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah, it really is. It really is powerful. So as you're doing this and people are through this process, what are some of the things that they tell you?
I'll never mention names because I've been in this business since 97.
Yeah.
But the patterns do repeat again and again and again. And maybe a way to answer that is to tell you that as the peer groups evolved, the participants said, all this content is really good. I like seeing it on the website. Could you write a book to answer Damon's question? I said, sure. So I put that information into this book, which is available everywhere. And there are basically 10 answers to that question. What are the things that people often ask? And it's what you might expect. How do I fit in? What's my role in the family? In the individual system, it's how do I learn to speak up? How do I express my thoughts and feelings on important topics? How do I keep a positive attitude? Positivity is a choice, but
Yes.
people often know how to do that. In the family system, I'm just going to read them for you. How do I keep confidence is about family business wealth. It's so important. It's like a critical concern.
Mm-hmm.
Another story might help. So a few weeks ago, I was with a client at the country club. They served us lunch. A couple of the elders were there for lunch, and then the elders left. So there are 10 or more next gens, all G3s and G4s, if I remember right. Well, I used this book and I gave it to them, and I used some of the content and walked through some of this and asked, to what extent do you keep confidences about family wealth? And they said, well, as a matter of fact, let's model that for you, Doug. And they went around and all stated, do you have any conditions or confidences that you need to share to the room before we convene this meeting? In other words, have you kept secrets, or do you have any vested interests in the nature of the conversation today that would preclude you from openly participating? Oh, it was beautiful. I was so excited. And I applauded them because not everybody does that. But when they do that, it forces them, reminds them to keep it there and leave it there.
Mm-hmm.
The flip side is when some bozo during COVID who is not being paid and has a price freeze for his employees posts on Facebook the new pool or the trip to Italy or the new, fancy car.
Yeah.
I wish I made this up, but those are true examples.
Yes.
So family wealth needs to be private, and it always will. And what that leads to often are family offices. Are you familiar with family offices?
Yes.
Are your viewers? Because
Explain
family,
it a little bit if they aren't.
they're sexy. You probably know that. Essentially, a family office used to be a way for some advisors to manage the family assets, and it used to be financial only.
Mm-hmm.
It's evolving.
Yeah.
In part because the millennials are saying, I care about my mental health and these other investments in donor-assisted funds that grandpa may not care about, or this political group that I know grandma's not going to approve of. So they want it discreet, but they want it done. And family offices also will look at a way to pool their resources. So a single family office serves the Gray family. We don't have one, but I'll make one up.
Yeah.
A multi-family office would be the Gray family and the Pistolka family and 7 other families, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
because then there are more assets, and they can look at our insurance needs,
Yes.
our capital assets, our property, healthcare. And they can pool those resources so that you know you're fine and you know your dogs and cats and pets are fine. So as family offices evolve, their needs are becoming holistic. And the team approach is what we're seeing more and more and more. So instead of calling your one advisor, like your wealth guy or your private wealth advisor, and instead of that person saying, yes, of course we can help you, they can't. The Merrill Lynch guys only sell for Bank of America products.
Yes.
So they need to turn to their estate lawyer, and then they need to turn to their business psychologist, and they need to turn to a cadre of, let's say, 6 or 8 vetted people, experts who can support their needs over time. That's a trend. So
Yeah.
we're going to see even more of that ahead.
Yeah, and they've been around for a long time, but like you said, they really have evolved into a lot more than what they were, because it was all, back in the day, a decade or more ago, or 2 decades ago, it was just taking care of the money. It's like investing the money. You might have a lawyer in there or something like that, but now it really is more holistic because they're teaching the next gens some things. They're involving people like you. They're worrying about, as you say, health, well-being, where the money's going, because it's changing over the generations, where they want the money to go and where they want to invest the money,
Exactly right.
and philanthropically, how much is going philanthropically over the, it's really interesting to see that change.
Another related piece that we haven't talked about yet is what we're modeling in a live webinar, and that's digital trust.
Yeah.
So the 20 and 30 somethings are more digitally trusting than kids our generation, right? You and I have shared.
Yeah.
What that means in business commonly is that they expect access to the financials. They want digital transparency. Owners may or may not want that. Passive owners may not want it. Active owners who have voting rights expect it and need it to be kept confidential, right?
Yes.
So what happens when there's a leak in a family business, or a board comes to learn something, or worse, there's a cyber attack?
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that folks are clear on this. Family-owned businesses are sitting on assets and have low security.
Yeah.
It's kind of like posting on social media that you're traveling in Greece, which means your home is unsecure and a target, right? And don't do that. I can tell you that I've had clients who are really smart lose $1 million because of cybersecurity fraud. Same client, 2 weeks later, lost a second $1 million. The FBI is involved, the banks are involved, the companies are involved, the insurance companies, because they've got primary insurance, and then they've got ransom insurance, which is never adequate, all of which has increased 800% in the last 12 months. We're going to see more and more of these attacks on family-owned businesses. It's terrifying, and it's inevitable. We're going to see it in our political campaigns, right? We're going to see it with AI. We're going to see it in all kinds of ways, which are going to be problems. How's that?
Yeah. And it is one of these things that you can go a long time without a problem, and it's not a problem until it is. And then when it is, it's really bad.
Exactly.
And
so my guy who had the same thing happen in 2 weeks apart, lost $1 million and then a second $1 million. What do you say to that? Oh, I'm sorry. They did more rigorous security stuff than you can imagine. There's a bunch of protocols and good things that we all ought to be doing. Two-factor authentication, changing passwords, having multiple sites, and making sure everybody has training so that they hover over the link before they click and open the link, which exposes the assets often. Those are things that we could train everybody. We could teach them on a weekly basis, and there's bunches of programs for doing so. But maybe it's a requirement.
Yeah. And maybe it's another reason too that these family offices may become more prevalent too, because yet just the data stays there in some way, somehow. Because
But the other
it's just
day,
it's such a scary thing.
it's a reality that the data will stay there. The other day, I was at one of those clients, and they video recorded me with somebody. They've got, I think, 80 clients and a significant assets under management.
Yes.
That's one of their realities, is that they provide for the cybersecurity needs of all those
Yes.
investors, and they expect to do so for generations. It's not like you go to your local. I don't want to pick a name,
Yeah. Just,
but but you are expected to work with a system that will know your needs and your family values, and why you shouldn't release certain information to certain people at certain times. And all
mhm.
that's written down, and it's part of the governance protocols, and it enables people to make smart decisions over time.
Yeah.
That's
That's
another
great.
thing.
I mean, it's a great thing because when we talk about, we're here today, we're talking about this preparing this next generation of leaders for this leadership transition. It really, it is being aware of cybersecurity. It is changing the way that we operate in light of these kind of things. It is understanding, as you said, if you've got something going on, you're like you said, I got a new pool putting in my house. It's really nice. And something else is not going. It's that training to say, you don't put that up there. That's
No,
just not the right thing to do.
that's
And because in the past, well, first of all, let's just look at the founders of these companies. They never had to deal with it.
no.
They didn't were not born in the digital age. A lot of them. We grew up in a age before cell phones, right?
Yep.
And now we have a completely different operating environment around us every second of every day.
Mhm.
And just if you just think about the amount of pictures that are taken in a second in a day is probably more than there were in weeks or months in the 80s.
Mhm. That's
And
right.
it's something that we have to deal with, and we didn't have social media, and we didn't have the cyber threats that we do now. It requires a completely different approach.
Right, which implies that we're going to be smarter. If only we were smarter.
If only we were smarter. Yeah.
Okay, so who's the wealthiest man in New York City?
No idea.
Bloomberg. Why? Why is Bloomberg so wealthy?
I don't know.
It's this point you just made. He manages the information flow.
Ah.
Wealth advisors sit with their Bloomberg machine, right, which does as much as or more than Google
Yeah.
currently,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
Google plus AI currently. We'll see what
Yeah.
happens over time, right?
Yeah.
And Bloomberg and his team is able to manage the information flow ahead. Well, let's imagine that businesses in the future are going to be digitally connected, providing a unique value, and managing the information in a secure way. There's a trifecta.
Yeah.
So when I think about the faces of business, they're going to lean always toward family members because they know them and love them and
Mm-hmm.
know their weak spots, and they'll hire somebody else to fill in the weak spot.
Yes. Yes.
I hope.
Yeah.
And we also know that the employees in those teams are more loyal
Yes.
than publicly employed people. They tend to
Yeah.
stay longer. And the owners tend to provide more services for them. Everything
Mm-hmm.
from healthcare to mental health care and leave should they need it. The notion of caring for a loved one. Classic example is women in careers like law who are on maybe a partner track and take time off to have a children or take care of an elder as their elder's aging. They never get back on the partner track, which is
Yeah.
why we have so many male partners in law firms. Well, what if some of these family owned businesses do everything they can to accelerate the women in their businesses, which is what, 52% of our college graduates now?
Yes.
And
Yes.
trending up, I'm told.
Yes. 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 Well, and this is really something that you bring a great point, that the family businesses can change. As you said, it's 60% of the GDP, 60% plus of the growth, employee growth or job growth in the U.S. There's a lot that the family business can do to change the face of of a business.
That's right.
Yeah.
So the purpose of this conversation, I hope, is just open people's eyes to some of
Yeah.
those trends and changes.
Yeah. Well, Doug, it's been awesome talking to you because you are a wealth of knowledge, and I can only imagine some of the conversations that you've had to have helping these next generation leaders with the founders or the earlier generation leaders and the transitions, because it's not an easy process. In the family dynamics, you want to be able to do what you need to do in the business and the financial world while still being able to have Thanksgiving dinner and not want to, strangle the person across the table from you.
That's not an occasional example. I hear that every week. Yes. Or I'll get the call. Can you fix my brother? No.
Exactly. Well, Doug, if someone wants to reach out and talk to you about their family business, their situation, their next gen leaders that they want to transition. So what's the best way to get a hold of you?
There's a bunch of websites. Action-learning.com is one of them. Next Gen Peer Groups with an S.com is one of them. AssessNextGen.com is another good one. I'm not super active on LinkedIn, but I'm told that I need to be more active. And I've lately been adding a Substack thing every 3 or 4 days.
Okay.
Called Legacy Leadership. All these are free, so I invite people to be part of them if they wish.
Awesome.
The short answer is reach out and ask questions. I think that's how to wrap things up.
Yeah. Awesome, Doug. Well, it's been great having you. And we've had Doug Gray here from Action Learning Associates. Doug's been helping family business leaders successfully accelerate the transitions, work through the transitions for many years. And just thanks for sharing your thoughts with us today.
My pleasure. Let's
All
go.
right.
Play ball.
You bet. Well, I want to thank everyone for being here. Richard stopped by and said, yes, he's familiar with family offices. Thanks for stopping by, Richard. Now, those of you that didn't comment, but out there listening today, we appreciate you. If you came in late, go back to the beginning and listen to what Doug had to say. He covered many good subjects, talking about family business transition, leadership transition, and the different things that he addresses when he's in those situations. Thanks, everyone. We'll be back again. Doug, hang out for a minute after, and we'll finish up offline.
You bet.